We're recording. And hello, everybody. Welcome to Responsive Web Design with Kyle Coberly. I'll be your host, Kyle Coberly, and we're going to talk about responsive web design. So, by the end of this lesson, I hope that you will be able to use media queries to control layout. So, let's do this. I'm going to structure a document, and then I'm going to push it to GitHub, and then you're going to pull it down, and then we're going to make it responsive together. How about? So give me an idea for something to do layout on.
Sports.
Cool. Get more specific a little bit.
Football.
Okay. What about football?
I don't know. I'm not a big football fan. I just kind of throwing out some random ideas.
Okay. More ideas.
Maybe like player cards where you're creating like a fantasy team, something
Okay.
like that.
Sure. So, maybe that looks something like, this is our page. We got a header, Flatiron Fantasy, and it's got a login thing over here. And then we've got these player cards. Like that. And what we want to do is make that so, come on. Stop being difficult. There we go. This turns into something like a smaller header. And this is kind of an anti-pattern in 2020, but maybe that turns into a hamburger. And then each of these kind of flow single like that. And then they got a picture on top with the text on the bottom instead of to the side. So that's like a pretty common responsive-y sort of thing that we might do. The first thing I'll call your attention to is that, with the exception of maybe that login to hamburger thing, it's the same document. We have the same shit in it. It's just presented slightly differently. So if we do this right, the only change that we need to make is in the CSS. Shouldn't need to touch the document at all. Documents, structure, hierarchy, that kind of thing. None of that has changed, so we shouldn't need to change the document either. All right, let's give this a go.
Just to clarify, when we say responsive web design, are we talking about responding specifically to what device you're viewing it on?
Kind of. So let's differentiate between two closely related terms. Neither of which are exactly that, but there's adaptive and responsive. Both of these aren't referring specifically to devices. These are referring to viewport size. So the viewport, if I pull up a browser, By the way, it's the new kylecorbally.com. Push that out over the weekend. So the viewport is all of the stuff in here that is in between the scroll bar and the URL bar and everything else. The stuff that's like what I'm actually like viewing the page, that part is the viewport. And so we want to be able to make it so that as the size of this changes, it keeps working.
Hey Kyle, do you ever design the other way too, like for really wide, just like monitors and stuff like that?
Absolutely. So the last breakpoint on this site is doesn't do super good if you. That one's all JavaScript, but yeah. So the biggest breakpoint on this is I think at 1200. So it's at 1170, 1180, 1190. So we're about to see it snap into the final one there. So you also want to design for that. Now, a thing worth keeping in mind is that like a Jumbotron or like a super big screen or those TVs or the projectors or something, they don't have infinity pixels to them. It's still constrained as far as like, they're just lowering the resolution, which is fine because you're looking at it from way farther back. And so you don't need to design for like a 5,000 pixel wide viewport ever. But yeah, you do want to handle the case where like, so my last breakpoint here is 1200 pixels or something. Probably makes sense to check that up to like 2000, 2500. So this screen is 1900 and yeah, still works. Yeah, somewhere in that neighborhood, it is worth to check up to that size. So back to adaptive and responsive. So we're referring to viewport size with those. Adaptive is, I'll show you on this site. So when I cross that threshold of 1200, see how like the size jumps? That's adaptive. So there is breakpoints, and when you cross them, you are applying different styles. So like in this one, the style sheet says, all right, and then once you cross my threshold, I want you to change the font size. That's adaptive. If, let's see. So when I get down here, how the text just kind of gets smaller, how these pictures get smaller, that part of it is responsive. You're responding to precise changes in the viewport size. So responsive is that, adaptive is breakpoints where major changes happen. So you need to take care of both of those concerns, but yeah. We got some stuff over in the chat. Is there a widget or something you are using in order to test as it's wider or thinner? Yeah, built into your DevTools. Yeah, the little cell phone looking thing. This thing right here. So this one's the Firefox one, which I like a little bit better, but the Chrome one's pretty good too. And you can also like go up here and pick specific devices, which is kind of neat. And you can do things like flip it over on its side, see how it looks that way, that kind of thing.
One thing I kept hearing a lot when talking about like responsive design or whatever is like a mobile approach first or a mobile first approach and stuff like that. How prevalent is that?
It's super common. I think it's a little overblown. The idea is that you decide you do your base design for the most restrictive circumstances first, and then you progressively add things as you get more screen real estate. This is fine, but I think what a lot of people took that to mean is that, all right, I'll do like my good design for mobile, and then I'll go, okay, what can I add? What can I add? What can I add? And that, I don't think that's a sane way to approach this. I would consider all of your different like inter breakpoint things as separate designs with the same content. And so rather than starting mobile and then adding these things for your other breakpoints, I would consider it more, all right, well, there's 3 breakpoints on here. I have lower than 700, 700 to 1200, and greater than 1200. Those are just 3 separate designs. It kind of doesn't matter which one of them I do first. For example, for this one, I did the desktop one first, the greater than 1200, and then I did the mobile one, and then I did the one in between. And like, I don't know, I could have done that in the opposite order. It would have been fine. So I think that like dogmatically only doing your mobile one first is a mistake. But like that idea, mobile first, that idea came out at a time when designers weren't designing for mobile, period. And you'd end up with this exact like desktop thing just crammed in teeny tiny onto a screen, and it was completely fucking unusable. So we needed to do something to get people to take the mobile web experience seriously. But no, I don't think you have to do your mobile design first.
And I just have one more question. I noticed you're using the units pixels, for width and stuff like that. One thing that confuses me a lot is like the units for CSS. There's so many. You can have percentages, pixels.
Yep.
But is that the one you want to use for width? Like Viewport is pixels?
Definitely for Viewport. Everybody uses it for that. There's a couple of other units that you could argue are more responsive. Like if I used percents for my font size instead of pixels, that's going to scale perfectly. Kinda, except they don't design the typefaces that way. There is no like 14.5 pixel font size for something. And each of those sizes are like technically different designs. And so you can end up with a lot of like in-betweeny shit with a lot of this stuff. And so really, for anybody who's been to my lessons on like design systems and stuff, so I'll have these like set sizes that are fixed pixels. That I like the mathematical relationship they have with each other and whatever else. And if I'm trying to make something bigger or smaller, I just go up or down this scale. And so that's why you see that font size jump instead of grow specifically. It's also a little bit easier to design for. But yeah, I used to be a pretty hardcore REMS guy. REM is is like a responsive unit. But I don't know. I read this book called Refactoring Ui, which is the best book on web design I think I've ever read. And that guy got me back on the pixel bandwagon. But yeah, you just use your media queries and stuff to change which pixel, which point on the scale you're using. I think it works a little bit better. Cool. Other questions?
When you say you're using media queries, you mean that's kind of like what you were doing when you were live coding the Flatiron website, where it's like you're just saying, okay, I'm going to use like Sass and take this array and just kind of switch, not array, I guess you were doing it with variables that you set up. And that way, is that what you mean by media query?
No, media query is this. So I want the padding to be this point on my scale, top and bottom, nothing on the sides, unless it's smaller than my small breakpoint, in which case the padding should be this point on my scales, but still 0 on the sides.
That's not code you could do in raw CSS, right?
It adds absolutely code you can do in raw CSS.
Okay.
Not with this little like ampersand, but yeah, media queries are a regular CSS thing. They're not a Sass thing. Okay. As we'll see. Let's give it a shot. So we're going to call this RWD. I'm going to make an index HT. Spell it right. It's Monday for everybody. I'm going to make an index.html and an app.css. I'm going to light server this. And make a basic document. So we'll say doc type HTML, HTML. It's got a head. It's got a body. It's alive. It's got a title. The zoom controls drive me crazy. There we go. All right, so I've got Flatiron Fantasy Football. We got the site up and rolling. So what's this thing supposed to look like? It is supposed to look like this. So that has a header and a main area. So we'll say header and main. And then this has that H1. It also has that little login looking thing. And then this main area, so that looks like a list of cards. So we'll say that's a list. And the player card has a, let's see, has an image. And it also has a description. Okay, so this one will be Von Miller. I should probably put their names on it too. So that means that, call this player details. Now notice how I'm not at any point naming these classes or any of this shit based on like how I think it's going to look. That's important, and I think that's like a real like separates the pros from the Joes in CSS. Is people who do things like large font and like I don't know, wide text, like that kind of stuff is describing how you want something to look, not what it is. This doesn't need a class. All right, and then over in our, let's get a picture of Von Miller. Oh, love it. Well, give me the image, stupid. Image, new tab. Oh, it's a base 64 image? Fuck off. How about this one? There we go. So grab that. And let's see how Flatiron Fantasy is shaping up. All right, nice. So I'm going to make a few of these. And we got our layout. All right, so let's do the desktop style for this. So the header is, so I want that Flatiron Fantasy Football and the login thing to like just sort of be on opposite sides of the screen. Classic flex problem. So I say that this is display flex, and then I justify the content as and the space between, and then those things go side to side. Cool. I don't think I'm going to pull in the full reset, but I'm going to reset a couple things.
Are you recording this lesson?
I am.
Huzzah.
All right, that's pretty good start for a reset. All right, so some other things we probably want to happen is probably want a little bit of padding on that stuff. So for the header, more on the top than on the sides. So maybe we'll say that's 32 pixels on top, 16 on the sides. Way more than that. 64 on top, 32 on the sides. All right, that's a little bit better. And then that H1, let's make the font size a little bit bigger on that. Okay, very nice. And then in our main area, I want the same padding on the sides, but probably less on the top and bottom. Okay.
Is it okay if I ask why you're using pixels?
Yeah, why not?
Well, I guess isn't it like the whole point for it to be responsive, or are we just going to use all our breakpoints for that?
We're going to use our breakpoints for that.
Okay, got it.
Cool. Let's see. We got that. Now some other things that I probably want to take care of. These LIs, well specifically, I'll call this player cards. So, let's see, what is player cards LIs, list style none, and padding left 0. Nope, they already don't have padding, that's right. And then I'm going to say each one of these should, now, if the goal is to get these to these cards to all kind of look like that, let's do it this way. I'll say for each player card, I'll give this a box shadow of okay. Within that player card, we're trying to get image on the left, text on the right. So we could do that with this player card. If I do a space between on this image in this div, that'll do that. So I could say display flex, justify content, space between. Okay, so now they're doing that. What else on this? I think in the player details, I'm going to add some padding to that. So we'll say 32, 16 top and sides, maybe 32 on the bottom. See how that looks.
I have a question.
Hit me.
So for player card, you flexed it, did space between. You don't have to do the same for. Oh, never mind. I was gonna ask. Never mind.
All right.
I figured it out.
There we go. So and like this is a good trick for like, I wonder what that should be. Just use the element inspector and write the style directly. It's a lot faster. But like, why isn't that going all the way over? All right, well I can just set the width on it. All right, and then let's see. I want to make that H2 a little bit bigger. Font size. All right. Okay. And then I'm going to constrain that image a little bit too. So I'll say player card image should have a max width of 250 pixels and maybe a little less. All right, cool. Getting somewhere.
When you're messing with images of all sorts of different sizes, would you say the best way to kind of resize them is with their width?
Always.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
If you touch both the dimensions, you're going to fuck the aspect ratio of the image. It'll look all stretched out. And there are several calculations the browser does that are based on the width, not the height. So width should always be your go-to for setting a size of an image. Cool. So next thing is that these are supposed to like kind of be all in a row like this. So the worst way to do that, and the way that will absolutely screw up your responsiveness, is to do things like, all right, well there's these two, and then there's a BR, and then there's another line that these next two are on, and like doing something like space between for those. Fuck that. That is such a terrible way to do this, and I see it all the time. What you really want to do is take this like list of players and flex it. This is like specifically what flex is for. So that's going to be player cards should be display flex. And the flex flow of that should be, it should be essentially rows, but we should allow them to wrap. Okay, very nice. And now if I make this a little bit bigger, all right. So much of this responsiveness stuff you get for fucking free. Like there's a lot of stuff that you don't need to make responsive. You just need to stop it from like not being responsive anymore. And so setting hard widths of things is usually the biggest culprit there. But flex, grid, and sometimes just not trying to like hard code line breaks and stuff with BRs in your HTML. A lot of that stuff will take care of so much responsiveness for you. All right, so we got a start there. I'm going to say each of these player cards should have a little bit of margin box. Yeah. Well, let's do that on the LIs. Margin bottom, let's see, each of these. There we go, it's a little bit better. And then...
Hey, Kyle, I have a quick question regarding images.
Yeah.
Is there any benefit to uploading to the site exactly the size of the image you're going to be using at different breakpoints? Would that make things quicker, since I'm assuming it doesn't have to like compress or what, I don't know what the word is, but change the image every time?
Yes. So, all right. So
Okay.
here's the deal with that. If I have a great big image for my Jumbotron, I don't want it to pixelate, and so it's fucking huge. It's 1.5 megabytes, 2 megabytes, something fairly large for a web image. On mobile, where that's teeny tiny, it's not fewer megabytes. You're just like making your browser download that giant ass file and then squish it. So totally reasonable at a smaller breakpoint to just use a lower resolution image, because if it's going to be squished down teeny tiny, and that can be like a 20K image, we get massive user experience savings by doing that. And fairly recently, they added a new element called Picture that is supposed to help us handle this. So you say, all right, there's a picture here, and your base image is this, and then as soon as you get to at least 800 pixels, the image becomes this.
Oh, gotcha.
And so, like, that's the correct way to handle this right now. I'll also say it's a pain in the ass to like maintain multiple versions of every image asset you have, but that's the way to handle that.
Cool. So just to confirm, so you're making the front end do more work when you're forcing it to convert images. So like how it affects the user experience is in load times.
Correct. Like, yeah, okay. It also like takes some processing cycles to like squish that image down. That's not the hard part though. Your browser can do that pretty quickly. It's downloading the file. Like, that's the gnarly part.
Got it.
Cool. Other questions so far? So I take every chance I get to demonstrate this, because during project presentations, I don't want to see this like browser default font shit, and you're like, "Nah, I ran out of time." No, you didn't. That's not how that works. So let's pick something with kind of a lot of styles. It's a good one for our fantasy football app. I've been a little bit into Nanito lately. Let's give that a shot. So I'm going to take their 400 weight, I'm going to go to the embed and throw this up at the top of my body, or my style sheet. And then say that, come on, the base font should be, oops, I had it, Nanito, and with a fallback to sans serif. And that is all you have to do to not use a browser default font.
If you want to have multiple weights to choose from, what do you have to do? You just change that URL, or do you add another one? Like, can you just add another param to that URL?
Okay, watch the URL on this. I'm going to add light 300 to it.
Yeah, okay.
It just changes the URL a little bit. Or like the italic fonts have eyes after them, like that. We can also add other typefaces to the same media query. So if I want to add Roboto to it also for some godforsaken reason. I love Roboto, but that does not go at all with the other type that I picked. Then that also just gets added to that.
Hey, Kyle.
Yep.
Does it matter if we use import or use link?
Use import.
Okay. Can I ask why?
Sure. Like any chance that you can get to put all... Okay, so what's going to happen is... well, actually, that wouldn't be the case there. The reason I would use import here is that we're putting all of our style concerns in one place. So I go, oh, shit, actually, I want the 600 weight of that too. Then I can go up to this URL in my style sheet and let's see, it already has the 400. I can just add the thing to the URL there instead of going up to the head here where I might have every other thing that I need in here. So that'd be my preference. The advantage to, well, I guess you'd have the same advantage in the CSS. I was going to say, by putting it in the link here, your user might have that font cached already, but you actually get that benefit with this too. But I like keeping all my style stuff in one place when I can.
Okay, thanks.
Neat. What else do we need to do here? This is looking pretty darn good for our desktop view. I'm going to get rid of the anchor color. I'm going to set that to inherit so that if I, for example, change my default font color, which I'm going to do right now, that applies to this also. Ah, looking good. All right, so that looks, yeah, that looks kind of like that, doesn't it? I'm going to make the H1, I'm going to make the H2 a little bit smaller. There we go, that's better. All right, so I'm going to push this up to GitHub, and then we are going to work on making it responsive. All right, so if you would be so kind as to go to github.com/kylecoverley/flatiron-fantasy-football and download that, we can do this next part together. I'm going to go rehydrate. All right. Hopefully you got that down, got it light servered. Let me show you something kind of neat with light server you may not have realized. So if I serve this up, and take a look at the thing that it put out on the screen. We have local and external. If you put that external URL into your phone, assuming you're on the same Wi-Fi network, you should be able to see it on your phone. So that's 192.168.0.131. Colon 3002, and then neat. If you can see it, there's my little Von Millers. So we can check the responsiveness there. Now, first thing you probably noticed is, holy shit, isn't that small? Why is it so small? Don't want it to be that small. Probably do that on the emulator also. So if I look at this on a Pixel 2, why are you so small, Pixel 2? All right, this is the first thing that you do to fix this problem. Let me check the chat real quick. Yeah, the greater than symbol is direct descendants. It's not for any LIs in the player card. You don't need the greater than for that. It's anything that is a direct descendant, meaning like immediate child of. So first thing we do to fix the size on this, I have to look this up every time. It's not worth memorizing. Responsive meta tag. And then go to the first link and then take the second one. And we're going to put that in the head of our HTML. Like that. And if you refresh your phone, hey, not so tiny anymore. Wild. If I throw the mobile emulator on this, oops. If I throw the mobile emulator on the thing that I'm actually working on, hey, not so tiny anymore. So if we take a look at that, this is saying that I want to set the viewport width to the device width, basically. Why that isn't a browser default in 2020, fucking beyond me. But a lot of like making your site work on mobile, like a lot of it you get for free just by using that meta tag. Okay, not so bad. So the next issue that I see with this is that margins are a tricky thing, padding and margins, to get right on different sizes, because now that we got this small screen, this feels like we're using way too much padding on the sides here. We want to use more of that space. So we're going to write our first media query to fix this. So that padding is coming in on the header and the main. So I'm going to add it to the, well, actually, I'm at it here. So this starts with the @ symbol, the media keyword, some parentheses, and then it kind of looks like a selector, except you write the selector inside of that. So we would do something like, and then change this to whatever we want it to be in this context. So this is the header. Yeah, the top and bottom is too much too. So if I say this is 32 pixels and this is 16 pixels. All right, so now what goes in between these parentheses here, that's when we want that style to apply. And so I could say something like max width 400 pixels. So if it's smaller, or if it's 400 pixels or smaller, this is the style that I want you to apply. Or what's this? This is 411. I'll make it 450. Did that actually do it? Oop, didn't grab it. Oh, no, it did. I was looking at the wrong thing. So see how those, the header padding and this padding in the main area is a little bit different now? I'm actually going to make that down to 12. Yeah, that's looking good. Okay, so I did that for the header. I want you to do that for this main area here. Write the media query that's going to knock down the padding to have, let's call it maybe 24 pixels and 12 pixels. So you write the media query that'll do that. Go.
You said we're doing it on the main?
Yep.
Okay.
So the header looks okay right now, but now it's got different padding than the main. So we want to make those look the same. Do a little bit of pattern matching.
Do you usually write these like separated like this per section? Is that convention, or can you?
Well, how I write them is with
one
SAS,
place,
which
like
makes it a
one-
lot easier.
Got it. If we're not using SAS, would it be more appropriate to do it how we're doing now, or do we like write one media query for each device like at the bottom so it cascades?
Oh no, don't do that. You'll drive yourself fucking crazy doing that.
Okay.
Keep them with the things so that as I'm changing this over time, I go, you know what? 48 pixels will work a little bit better than 64. The media query is right next to it, so if I need to change that also, they're together. If you maintain a completely separate desktop and mobile style, you'll go crazy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I tried doing that once and it didn't go well. Thanks for that tip.
Yep, never does. Another 30 seconds.
I have a question then. So as you're like when you've made your desktop site, you're starting to make your kind of first breakpoint styles. Are you like just doing it all visually as you go? Or when you were making the original desktop site, do you sometimes go, this is this H1 size, later I'm probably going to want to change it on mobile, so let me just create the media query ahead of time?
In general, you don't want to anticipate the work that you imagine you're going to do in the future. You want to minimize that kind of stuff and maximize done. So done, think like ballpoint game style. So this could be, I would rather have one page completely done, ready to go, all the styles it needs, than 6 pages that have a real good framework that I can build all this shit off of. Like, never do that. Make 3 complete pages and then take the parts that are common to all 3 of them and extract those into like a frameworky kind of thing.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right, so can I get a volunteer to talk me through adding the media query to this.
Okay, so we go to the main, and then just below it, immediately preceding it, we're going to write add media, and then within the parentheses, we're going to give the same breakpoint that we're using, which is 450 pixels. And quick question, if we're going to have multiple breakpoints, do we chain them within the parentheses, or do we create new media queries?
That's a super good question. You do them one after another. So like, if you're going this direction, it would be something like this. And what's kind of cool is if my middle breakpoint has something that I also want to use in my small breakpoint, they cascade. So I could say that this one's 20 and has a font weight of 700. And then if all I'm doing is changing the font weight on that one, but I also want this to have 20 pixels, that'll carry over.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so then within the curlies, you're gonna select the element that you want to change, which is main in this case, and then curlies, and then you apply your style, which is padding 2412.
Thank you. All right. Ta-da! We made something kind of responsive. So some other things that we probably want to do on this. So this side-by-side, and this is like kind of a general rule of working with like your smallest mobile size, is you have little to kind of no control over your horizontal axis. Even this, having this like have the login thing on the same horizontal space as it, anytime you can get away from something like that, like you're probably going to be happier. But like in our mobile design for this one, we got the picture on top in the card. So let's take care of that. So, all right, so I'm display, flex, and space between. All right, what if I do a media query, max width 450 pixels, and I target that player card. So the default flex flow for something is a row wrap, I believe. We're going to override it to be column no wrap, which means justify content is not going to do what we think it does anymore. So you can do something like initial, sort of unset that. Hey, there we go. Pretty darn good. Now we got the picture on top. I might also want to do something like center that image. So you can add more than one style in a media query. So we could say I also want the image to be align self center. Cool. All right, so that card, that kind of works.
In Flex, I'm having a hard time visualizing how a column would wrap. Like, why did we specify no wrap on column?
So a column wrapping is snaking, like that. There's no land in which we want that to happen, so we're going to explicitly prevent it. Cool. So let's talk about how we handle this header. It's the last thing we'll do. So maybe I don't want to say Flatiron Fantasy Football. I just want to say FFF. And I want to turn my login into a hamburger. So this is like kind of crossing some semantics boundaries, but I think we'll be okay. What if I have an alternate header? I call this one desktop, and I call this one mobile. And in the mobile view, this one says FFF, and this one ends up being a hamburger. I'm just going to put the Unicode in for it right now. Unicode for Hamburger Menu. 2630. There we go. All right, so that's how I want it to look on mobile. So what I can do is use display none to flip between those. So I can say perfect. The desktop header is going to be display none, and then the mobile header will be display block. And meanwhile, I'm going to flip those around outside of this so that the default is that the desktop displays and the mobile is hidden. And let's see what that does. All right, looking good. Not so bloody bad. Turned into the hamburger and the thing. So we still need to get the spacing isn't working on those though. I wonder what's up with that. Should still be trying to.
Should do display flex instead of display block.
There you go. Well done. Points to you. All right. There we go. We got our little hamburger. And then if we take the emulator off, we're back to that.
How'd you get the hamburger again? What was the...
I type in the Unicode for it. So in Vim, it's Control V U2630. On your computer, it's probably Alt or Option 2630, something like that. Or you can just copy and paste it. Cool. Hit me with some questions.
Okay. Before I was using EM instead of Pixel just to get the page dynamic. Is it like a pro and cons, like do it that way or in your way?
Yeah, so the M's, and like I like rems a little bit better than M's because rem is a root M, which is consistent across the entire document. It's whatever the if you've never heard of this before, M is so an M is the width of a capital M in whatever typeface and typeface size you're currently using. So whatever the current font is, an M is the width of a capital M. Cool. A rem is that at the root level of the document. And so it ends up staying consistent. If your like default font size is 16 pixels, a capital M takes up the entire width of that. And so an M is just a rem is a really good shorthand for 16 pixels. And so you can do something like 2 rems is 32 pixels, and then 1.5 rems is like a shortcut for 24 pixels. I did that for years. It's fine. It's a completely fine way to do it. But like I said, that Refactoring Ui book got me thinking about that a lot more. It's a lot nicer, having done both of them, to have scales and then just pick the next point on the scale. Because like I ended up doing a bunch of like weird shit like 2.25 rems and like just nonsensical units like that. And by having things like that sizes doc with those variables, it allows me to give them names, which I think is a lot more useful.
And when you say the default size for the root, would it be, for instance, whatever the default font is for like the body?
Yes. Like technically the HTML element, but yeah, same thing.
So if you do like a media query and you set the body text to smaller, do the rims change then?
Yes.
Okay.
More questions?
If you're using a CSS pre-selector that set it to 0, what does rem become then? That doesn't make sense, actually. I just realized. You would never do that.
Yeah. There's no good reason to set a font size to 0.
Yeah, I don't know why.
That's good. I like it.
So then M refers to the font size of the parent. Not rem, but
yes.
M. Okay.
Well, cool. The current font size for that element, yeah.
Okay, and then us kind of taking, you saying you didn't really like crossing the semantic boundary when we added the second header.
Right.
And what's another way of doing that? Just via JavaScript, creating headers on the fly, or what's?
Yes, and that's worse. So now I have structural elements in my JavaScript, which is gross. A better way to handle that would be with a component library. So that whole thing would look a little bit different in React or Vue or something like that, because I can use conditionals. That, for whatever reason, feels less gross to me.
Is it possible to keep it as header and then just do something like the targeting a subclass, kind of like the : after thing or something, or like content of H1 or something like that?
So let's try it. Let's say I'm trying to do this FFF thing without fucking with the HTML. All right, so I need to target that H1. How about... I'm not sure if this will work, but it'll be kind of fun to see. This was generated by the media query. All right, so I want to turn that into FFF. I think if I target that in the media query, I can override the content with the content property. No. Let's see if it made it into this style, though. No, it's in there. Yeah, maybe you can only use content in a pseudo element. So if I did something like that, that'll append it to it. Yeah, I think you have to do it something like that. You could probably play with the naming on it a little bit though. And so instead of having desktop header and mobile header, you just use better semantic names for what those things are. You could probably... There's not an abbrev element. There's something kind of like that, though. And so you do that, but that's hidden in certain things. There's probably ways you could play with that, but at some point you're like thinking a little too hard.
Okay. Yeah, I Googled and someone was like, CSS isn't the right place, but if you had to, a recommendation someone has is just to put 2 spans and then still do like the display or not display thing. But this way you still keep, I guess, one H1 or one thing.
Yeah, that's not bad. So yeah, if we did something like this, got rid of the class on that, and we had and then this becomes something like full name, and this one becomes abbreviation. That's pretty semantic. And then I can do all right, so now that says FFF and goes back to fantasy football, and we kept it semantic.
Cool. Would this be a good case for a dataset attribute and then just change the content of the attribute in the media query within CSS?
I don't think you can do that with datasets. Datasets are what link an HTML element to JavaScript. That's how you can pass like variables and stuff back and forth between those. I don't think CSS can see dataset stuff or change it or anything.
Yeah, I was watching last night that you can change the content using the attribute, and then you can display the content of the dataset on the page.
Gross.
Maybe I'm wrong, but
no, like I believe you. I know there's somebody who like tried to write a whole like single page application using only CSS, like by abusing the content attribute. And I'm sure there's like something like that you could do with like data sets or something to like effectively pretend JavaScript. But I wouldn't do that in practice. That does not get a Kyle Coberly stamp of approval.
Awesome.
Last question I have is, I've noticed like a general aversion to using like ID. Why is that? Because like, for instance, this header it's unique, or that span is unique.
Sure.
Why not just use ID?
Because that's a super good question. The reason everybody hates IDs is because of a thing called specificity. So specificity works like this. A tag gets 1 point. A class gets 10 points. An ID gets 100 points. And an inline style gets 1,000 points. So the way specificity works is when you're selecting an element in CSS, every piece that you add to that, like you take the point values for each of these and then you add them up. If 2 styles come into conflict, the one with the higher point value wins. If they have the same point value, the last one wins. So for example, if I put a class of header on this and an ID of header on it, whatever I put in the one for the ID will win every time. Doesn't matter if I put it in the middle or first or whatever, the ID one's always going to win. The one with a class, if I have 2 of these, whatever's in the second one is going to win, unless this one, the first one, has more classes in it. So if I did that, that one's going to win because it gets 20 points instead of 10 points. Now, you may be wondering, like, okay, so to overcome an ID, I just need to select something with 10 classes, or like you can do that by using the same class selector 10 times. So that's where like our like points metaphor of specificity kind of falls apart. It's not actually points. You're not supposed to be able to override the next level. Every browser does it differently, and I don't think they publish the numbers. Last I saw in like Firefox, like something like 64 classes would override an ID, but like you're not supposed to do it, so don't. But it gives you like a mental model for why you aren't able to override something. So the thinking goes, if all you use is classes and you never use IDs or inline styles and you never use tags, classes are everything, this whole mental model for overriding things gets way simpler. More classes override fewer classes. I think these people are dumb babies. I know the aversion to tag selectors. I don't give a shit. I think they're so much more semantic and keep your code so much less noisy, and keep you from having to come up with a bunch of names. Because this doesn't need to be class secondary heading. We have a tag for that already. It's called an H2. So
that makes sense.
So I use those pretty liberally, but any tag style gets overridden by any class style. And I also don't think that's a terribly difficult thing to remember. So if like my tag selectors are essentially what any H2 should be, I can still override it by giving it any class. But I still shy away from IDs because IDs are like effectively impossible to override. Now, like you can still use them in your document. In fact, you have to, like in a couple different places, like linking a label to an input in a form. You have to do that with IDs. But we don't have to use those as like our style hooks. That said, I still do every now and then. Like, I don't have that much of a problem with it. I did it on my personal site. All the like main sections, those are unique, so they have IDs, so I target them that way. But yeah, you'll find people get nee about it, and specificity is why.
Okay, I see. And then also for something like your personal site, it's your own project, so you know there aren't going to be like surprises in scaling that working on something collaborative might have.
And I think that like that surprise in scaling, a lot of that comes from poor file structure. So we look at my app or my personal site. What is happening? I want to let me do that. What is happening right now? Oops, it's because I'm using I'm not using my Mac, that's why. So being able to split these all out in different files helps a lot also, but like about is a section of my page, and so I target it with that. And then this is a trick that I think helps with this a lot. Everything inside of this, I'm namespacing. Every single one of these styles only applies to something that's inside of the About section. I can't step on anybody's toes. The only way I could do that is they also named their section About. So if whatever your like top level thing is, and like in front-end frameworks, it's pretty typical to like do this with the name of the component. And so as long as you didn't name two components different things, and there's all kinds of other things that would break if you did that, this gives you some pretty good sandboxing of your styles. So that like this one, for example, isn't going to remove margin from every image across the entire app. It can't. And things that I do want to do that for, that's my resets.
Okay, cool.
More questions?
So like, what about designing or making a breakpoint for the landscape view of mobile? Is that just the same, but you do it for 800 pixels?
So great. I love where this is going. So don't think of tablet versus portrait. Don't think about tablet versus mobile versus desktop. Just think about the design. And also, like, a really common question is like, what breakpoint should I use? Use the ones that work or don't for your design. And so, like, to give you some ideas, we go, all right, if I start making this bigger, when does it fall apart? That's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's all right. So like this one goes like pretty good all the way through, and like Flexbox helps a lot with that. But you might end up with something where the text just keeps getting longer and longer, and then we can use some usability guidelines. So like, for example, text, for like long form text, you should, or not, sorry, not short form text, you want like about 7 to 10 words or so on a line. You go, okay, well, if I'm getting more than that, then I need to either constrain that or up the font size. Okay, so you up the font size. And now you're getting fewer words per line, but the font is bigger. All right, well, there's also like readability guidelines for font size. So you go, all right, well, if this is primarily going to be somebody on a laptop, that means their eye is this far apart from the screen. And there's also like optimal font size things for that. So, all right, well, if I'm at the optimal font size for where that user is probably using that screen and it's already constrained or whatever, then I probably don't want to grow it anymore. But if the screen keeps getting bigger, all right, well, maybe I center it or something like that. And that's what I did on mine. So for the like super jumbotron things, I have this content wrapper here that keeps that stuff constrained so it doesn't just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But so in this one, like the sides will keep growing, but the center won't. So like you can do some things like that. But yeah, for this one, I quite literally just put it in responsive mode and then went to my 320 is the smallest you generally ever have to support. That's like iPhone 5. So I started here and I go, okay, this is fine. So when I make this bigger, when does this design start kind of falling apart? Like this is getting a little bit long in here. So 600 I think was the original breakpoint on this. I keep making that bigger. Like that's probably too long. I should probably like make this maybe 750 or so. And so that's why that breakpoint is there. Similar thing with this, where like these work side by side pretty well here. And that's getting a little bit big for a single column thing. And so you go, all right, well, oh, that's pretty good. That's a little bit too big. So you're looking for things like that. Because if you start trying to think about like, all right, well, I have mobile. Well, I have mobile portrait. Well, I have tablet. I have tablet portrait. I have iPad Pros. I have iPad Pro portrait. And then I have a little desktop, a little laptop, and a big laptop. That's like too much work, and none of that adds any value to it. If you think about it in terms of like, all right, when does the design stop working, and when do I need a new design? That'll work on anything.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
More questions?
Not really. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I was just gonna say something I'm having problems with designing one on my project right now is I'm trying to create like a hamburger menu for like when you switch down to mobile or a certain width, the menu will just be able to be like a drop down. When you click on the hamburger menu.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm having problems making that work in mobile.
Okay. Is it like you can't get the hamburger to show up, or you can't get the menu to work?
I've got the hamburger to show up.
Okay.
But the way I'm trying to have it like have little smooth animations so that it like glides down.
Yep.
And I've been doing that by like kind of pseudo hiding the elements by reducing like element heights to 0 and stuff. But I keep getting these like errors where I'm selecting one link and it's like choosing other links or something. I have no idea.
The most common way that people do hamburger menus and things like that is to, so if this is the page, like with all the visible content and stuff in here, then what you actually style to is a document that's this big, but everything that's overflowed, your like little viewport, is hidden. So then you do things like put your hamburger menu just over to the side, and so it's overflowing it, it's hidden, user can't see it, but it's still in the DOM. And so then when you click the hamburger button, you do something like a transform translate, and go, okay, well, I want to translate this over 100% to the right or whatever. And then you use transition to animate that. Here, we can try it out real quick. Practice. All right. So let's say I have some menu over here. We'll call this an off-canvas menu. So I have this off-canvas menu. I'm not hiding it. I want to make it so that I can't see it. Slightly different. All right, so right now I'm seeing that kind of over on the side there. Let's turn off the mobile emulator. Over. All right. So for that off-canvas menu, I'm going to absolutely position it. That'll take it out of the document flow, but it'll like throw it on top of my shit. I'm going to set it to right 100%. That's going to hide it. Oh, it didn't even do scroll bars. Oh, that makes sense because it's absolutely positioned. Now I'm going to make it so that if it also has like an active class, off-canvas menu active, then it's going to be right 0. And then I'm going to animate it. I'd say right should have an animation of 0.3 seconds. Beep. All right, cool. Now, let's add a little bit of Dribble script to add that class whenever this thing gets clicked. We'll change this to menu, and we'll call that a menu toggle. So if I take this menu toggle document query selector menu toggle, and then add a click listener to it. That is an anchor tag, so I do want to prevent default. I think I also need to return false for links. And I want to get my off-canvas menu. And do, let's see, off-canvas menu class list dot toggle active. All right, let's see if it works. Yep. Kinda with the wrong direction. Oh, that's right. This needs to be negative 100%. Hey! And then if I give that like a kind of opaque background and maybe put it down a little bit more. Put it down 300 pixels and give it a background color of white, and maybe give that a box shadow also. A big like washed out one. So I'll say 0, 4 pixels, 20 pixels, and then a kind of lighter, maybe like that. All right. Yep, it's all the way down there. Too far down. 100 pixels, and give it some healthy padding also. Hey, look! We made a little off-canvas menu. Oh, there's that horizontal menu I was trying to hide. We'll say overflow X hidden. Does that make the horizontal bar go away? Something like that. Anyway, that's the general idea.
So do you have to use JavaScript to do that, or is there like a pure CSS way to do it?
Like adding and removing classes, that's a JavaScript thing. And that's appropriate. It's behavior.
Okay. Why did you have to return false in the link?
Because I don't want it to try to navigate anywhere. There we go. Horizontal bar's gone now. More questions? What was the Unicode for that? 2630. There we go. Off-canvas menu, baby.
Thanks, Kyle.
Awesome. Cheers, homies.
Thank you.